pull-down screen. Is there like a standard place where Mr. Smith and I generally go so that we're not like right in front of the... if there's like if that's something, what everyone usually does is such and so, we would do that. Otherwise, we'll just sort of move back.
We'll take that up at the next recess.
Okay.
We're going to recess between
these
two arguments, but I can tell you that normally the screen is a little bit higher than you all's heads, and so normally it just remains at the council table, but we can talk about any change to that you need to. Spring chairs, please. Mr. Waller, closing argument for the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Peaceful setting, urban location. When Melissa Huggins-Jones decided to move here in April of 2013, that's what she was looking for. A peaceful setting, an urban location. You've heard that she'd gone through a tough divorce back in Tennessee. Divorce is tough, especially when you've got kids involved. She needed a change of scenery. She wanted to come be closer to family and friends who lived just down the road. She was looking forward to a bright future. She had a good job at the First Tennessee Bank that she liked. She had friends already in the neighborhood. You heard that on May 13th of 2013, she had gone to work and come home and enjoyed a nice dinner with Dawn and Steve Wallace. A post-Mother's Day dinner as you would have it. She came home, they hung some pictures, had a good time. And when Dawn and Steve left, she said, hey, I'm going to go walk around the neighborhood, talk with some of my friends, get some fresh air. And she did that. She went over to Jemay Avent's house and played with their daughters played, Hannah and Blue. She came back home and settled in for a peaceful night. It's kind of ironic that in April of 2013, about the same time that Melissa's moving to Raleigh, Travion Smith and Ronald Anthony are moving in together out in Oxford. Together. You've heard that they did everything together. They moved in together. You've heard that they broke into cars previously together. And you heard that on May 13th of 2013, they were together. That they went to that Marijuana's Anonymous meeting. They went and broke into some cars. They took a break and went to Bonefish. Went and broke into some more cars. and then went out over to the Allister Apartments. It's at that point that they leave Sarah Redden, and they leave her together. And they go and they climb up the side of that wall, and they enter Melissa Huggins-Jones' apartment. Melissa was looking forward to a peaceful life here in Raleigh with her 2 kids. That turned into a nightmare on the early morning hours of May 14th of 2013. Miss D's argument to you was 43 minutes. She spent about 30 of those minutes talking about Ronald Anthony. Ladies and gentlemen, Ronald Anthony is a murderer. He stood in this very courtroom and pled guilty to killing Melissa Huggins-Jones. He is a murderer. But that's not the whole story. That's not where it ends. They want to blame 100% of this on Ronald Anthony. But ladies and gentlemen, there's an old saying that when you point the finger at somebody, you've got 3 fingers pointing right back at you. Ms. D said there's some things they can't explain to you. And those things all involve Travion Smith being there with Ronald together. Where is the evidence from this witness stand that Ronald Anthony made Travion Smith do anything? They talk to you in opening statements about how Ronald Anthony is manipulative and how he's driving the train here. Where is the evidence that Ronald Anthony made Travion Smith do a thing that night? The best they've got is Sarah Redden says, well, Travion did what Ron asked him to do. My friends asked me to do a lot of things. Go out to dinner with them, go for a run with them, whatever it may be. But at some point, ladies and gentlemen, when your friend says, hey, kill somebody for me, there's a breaking point there. Free will, you being able to make your own choices in life, comes into play. This case is not all about Ronald Anthony. This case is about the state of North Carolina versus Travion Smith. At the end of the day, the fact that Ronald Anthony has pled guilty to first-degree murder has no basis, has no relevance to what you're here to decide. The fact that he's serving a life sentence has zero relevance to your decision. They keep bringing that up, and I'm here to tell you that's not here for your consideration. It doesn't matter if Ronald Anthony's charge is still pending. It doesn't matter if he's been found not guilty. It doesn't matter if he's convicted. This case is about Travion Smith. And they want to push everything towards Ronald, but they can't deal with Travion being there. The way I'm going to try and walk through this closing argument is I want to give you a timeline, and then I'm going to summarize some of the evidence that you heard in the first week and then again the second week. I know the first week was kind of the high drama in which you heard from Sarah Redden and Melvin Brown and Amber Alberts, and I understand that's the drama part. And then we moved to the second phase, which was the CCBI phase, the crime scene investigative phase. And I know that some of that got tedious and whatnot, but I hope that you saw where we were going with it. And it takes time. I know it's not as exciting, so I thank you for your patience, and I thank you for getting through that with us. But at the end of the day, what it does is precludes them from saying, hey, there's nothing but Sarah. There's nothing but Melvin. We corroborated what they said with physical evidence. It's not just statements. And as Ms. D said, they can't get away from that. So a timeline, we'll start there. Very simple. Dawn and Steve leave about 9 p.m. that night. on May 13th, 2013. That's the Monday night. She goes and talk. Melissa and Hannah go over and see Jamae Avant in Blue, and they talk. And then they move, and then they go back to the house. You heard Captain Way from Cannon Security say, hey, we did one of our security checks. We drove through the neighborhood, the apartment complex, and at about 10 o'clock p.m. the lights were still on in that apartment. Moving into the next morning, this is that Tuesday morning, May 14th of 2013. Raleigh responds to a suspicious person call in the area around 12:17 a.m. And you heard from officers testifying that, again, it appeared to be people breaking into cars. Nobody's seen at that time, no one's apprehended at that time, but it puts Raleigh in the area around 12:17. And then you have this call from Esler Hall at 12:43 a.m. to report seeing two black males and a female breaking into her neighbor's car. That's them. That's Ronald, that's Travion, that's Sarah. They're at her house at 12:43 a.m. And you've seen from the map where that is in relation to the Allister Apartments. Miss Hall is down in this area, same area as Clara Reynolds. The apartment's up here. At 12:43, they're in the area. And you heard me ask Miss Hall and Miss Reynolds, how long does it take to get up there? How far is the distance? Oh, it's an easy walk. I think Miss Hall said 8 to 10 minute walk. Miss Reynolds said if she's running 1 to 2 minutes. So they're in the area at 12:43. Theodore Miller, again from Kane Security, does a check. 2 a.m., doesn't see anything. Raleigh officers clear the car break-in at 2:19 a.m. And then at 7 a.m., Mr. Pittman finds Melissa there in her bedroom. And you heard that chilling 911 call. When the 911 operator asked Mr. Pittman to do certain things, and in his words, he says, it's too late. She's cold. A week goes by. And you're going to hear me talk about it in the crime scene investigation portion of this presentation. But clearly, Raleigh, CCBI were doing everything they could. They're doing checkpoints. They're doing dusting for fingerprints. They're checking Craigslist, thank God. They're doing everything they can to find the perpetrators of this murder. And on 5/20, May 20th, they get a break. I mean, it is a huge break. Without what happened on 5/20, as Travion tells Melvin Brown, they may still be out there. But they screwed up. They put those laptops on Craigslist on May 20th of 2013, and thankfully Detective Zeke Morse was looking there. And he sees it. He sees that orange laptop, and he does his phone calls with Mr. Clinton Merritt from Lenovo, and they know they've got their computer. They've identified the seller as Michael McCollum, and they set up the meeting in which Michael McCollum doesn't show. By 5/21/13, they're on the case. They're on the right track. Travion and Michael McCollum meet up around, I believe he said around midday. And at that point, Travion Smith walks into Michael McCollum's residence with that silver laptop and sells it to him for $50. Ronald sells the orange laptop to Julius Bumpers. Ronald and Travion are then detained later that afternoon at the Walmart together. Amber Albert's phone's dumped. The orange laptop pictures are on there. Sarah joins them at the police station. May 22nd, the house in Oxford searched, and then they're arrested. That's your timeline. Starting on May 13th of 2013, excuse me, ending on May 22nd of 2013. Michael McCollum, he's friends with Ronald Anthony. Sure, great. Sends in the pictures, post about the ad, but what he told you was, hey, on Craigslist, the minute you get full asking price, you know something's wrong. So he took it down. He took that post down. And he told you, hey, Ron had called me about the laptop, but I didn't have it at that point yet anyhow. I couldn't sell it. Ronald hadn't brought it to me. Never meets Ronald that week. The next morning, Travion Smith comes into his residence with that laptop. And you can see it right in that picture, right here in this picture on that silver area right there. Michael McCollum's a smart guy when it comes to electronics and computers. He says, this is at least a $1,000 laptop. And Travion's willing to sell it to me for $50 right now. This thing's hot. Something's not right here. Wanted to get rid of it. So they do the transaction, the $50. Travion leaves, and what do? They come back and they smoke weed. Ladies and gentlemen, does that sound like to you someone that is distraught about committing a murder? He knows what he's done. And he can still come and smoke weed with the guy. In the booking process, Anthony seems distraught while Smith is smiling, laughing on the phone. All they wanted that laptop for was $50 to smoke weed. That's cold. Then who else do we meet? Amber Alberts. Amber Alberts, Ronald Anthony's girlfriend, but Ronald and Travion both live with her in Oxford. Travion again moves in April of 2013. How does she describe them? They were like brothers. They didn't have any issues between them. They did everything together. And they see those laptops when they come back. She sees the laptops when they come back to Wake Forest. And they come back, I believe, on the 15th. Ronald has the orange one at that time. Travion has the silver one. Laptop pictures on her phone. And then she tells you about how they came to her house, how Raleigh came to her house that night and did the search, and how she assists with identifying clothes and electronics, including a camera that was stolen from the Kane Realty leasing office. And let's go to this search. Again, you heard everything's Ronald Anthony's, everything's Ronald Anthony's, everything's Ronald Anthony's. What did you hear from the witness stand? When Amber Alberts saw them, they both had book bags. And they both appeared to have a lot of stuff in them. Electronics, GPS. She described the bags as bulky. And she said both of them had the laptops. She said, again, Ronald had the orange one, Travion had the silver. And then let's go to Claire's iPod. You heard from Claire Reynolds. You heard her talk about this iPod that was stolen the night of the break-in. All cracked up, immediately recognized it, said she wanted it back. Who did Amber say had this purple iPod that night, or when they were in Wake Forest? Travion Smith. He's just as much a part of that as break-in of cars as Ronald Anthony is. They're doing it together. The shoes. This is the first time we'd had somebody talk about the shoes. Whose shoes are these, Miss Alberts? The blue and black. Well, we thought they were called Nikes at some point, and then figured out they were a knockoff brand starter. Whose shoes are these? Ronald Anthony's. Whose shoes are these? Black and red ones. They're Travion Smith's. Anthony sends her a letter to get rid of the clothes. Travion is living there too, ladies and gentlemen. He's asking her to get rid of all the clothes. And you heard that when they got back from Oxford that night, Ronald did something that he didn't do normally. He threw all of their clothes into the washing machine. And then you've got the bonfire out back. Sarah Redden. She's testified here without a deal in place. Obviously, she's told you she wants to get home to her kid. But she is charged with first-degree murder right now with no deal in place. She was there. She was there with them the entire night when Ronald Anthony and Travion Smith were together. They went to that Ben & Jerry's. You've heard about that. You heard about the disturbance, and you heard about what happened there with Amy Radley. It's not so much as to what actually happened there at the Ben & Jerry's that's important here. There was a disturbance, filling out the applications, and then yes, Ronald came over to Starbucks and confronted her about it. That's not necessarily what is important about her statement. The important part about Amy Radley is that it happened at all. So when you come to thinking about Sarah Redden's statement, these folks, Amy Radley, Mike Hupp, Sarah Melvin, who you'll see in a minute, they don't have a dog in this fight. They're regular, everyday citizens off the street working their own jobs or running their own groups. But they can tell you these things happen. So you don't have to just rely on Sarah's statement. I'm asking you to. The defense asked you to believe most of her statement. But listen to what these people had to say. These things happen. Sarah told them to you on the witness stand. She told you about the altercation at Ben & Jerry's. She told you they went to Marijuana's Anonymous and that they broke into cars. It's the fact that these things actually happened and that they went there that I ask you to consider in viewing Sarah Redden's statement. The Bonefish Grill, Sarah Melvin. She sees them there at that table and what do they have in front of them? Junk, stuff, golf tees, paper clips, coins, stuff that you would get out of a car from the first neighborhood off of Millbrook. That's the stuff on the table there at Bonefish Grill. And then they go and do the second set of car break-ins. How do you know Sarah is correct on that? You heard from Esther Hall. You heard from Claire Reynolds. You've seen the iPod. You heard from Jemae Avant that her husband's car got broken into. And you heard that Ron bought gloves. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And what that means. Tell her to stay stay in the building that's under construction. She can't see them from her vantage point. And she even says that she walks outside from that building at one point, and she labeled where she is as the silver tack here, and this is the victim's apartment. And when she walked outside, she looked. She looked to see where they were. She knew that there were cars parked out in front of that building. She thought that's what they're going to do. Hey, we've been breaking into cars all night. I'm sure they're going to go hit those cars. And she looks out there and she can't see them. They're not there. She sees Raleigh police officers in the area. You heard from Officer Wegner and Officer Strong. Yeah, we were circulating the area. Officer Strong says, yeah, I even used my spotlight at times. Why did Sarah tell you that she ran under the building or under the breezeway? Because the cops were using their spotlights that night. She hides in the stairwell. An important thing to note here, she does not hear any doors open or close. And she doesn't see anybody jump down off of that balcony. She doesn't see Ron or Travion at all from that vantage point until she hears a noise. And she walks over and she sees Travion, not Ronald, standing on that second floor balcony, wiping it off with his shirt. Turns out he didn't get it all off, as you'll see here in a moment. But why else would you be wiping off a railing on a second floor apartment unless you're trying to get rid of the evidence? Wiping it off with his shirt. Where's Ron? Points behind him. How does he know where Ron is unless he's been in there himself? Where's Ron? In there. She goes under the breezeway again at this point, under the stairwell. She lets him know that there's cops in the area. She goes under the breezeway, says she stays there for a few minutes, and then she decides, hey, it's time to get out of here. Something else more is going on. She goes around to the front of the building, and at that point she sees Ron. Only Ronald. And he sends her to the fence. Travion is not there at that time. She goes to the fence, and a few minutes later, Ronald and Travion join her. At this point, Ronald has water bottles. And what did you hear in this case? You heard that the leasing office, according to Detective Brady, had water bottles that they set out for their customers when somebody came in. That makes sense. Come in to look for an apartment or rent an apartment, and you have water bottles there for them. Ronald has water bottles that she's never seen before. She's been with him all night, and this is the first time she's seen those water bottles. And Travion has the laptops. Travion has the laptops. She notices that neither of them have gloves at this point, but they had them on earlier. That's consistent with the other evidence in the case. You heard that all those cars were processed out there by Detective Falk and that nobody got any fingerprints. Why don't you get fingerprints? Because you have gloves on. Don't have the gloves at this point. Kind of unusual. Ronald calls Reese to come and get them, and he does. They get picked up there at North Hills Mall. But before they do that, as they're running down Six Forks Road, they stop. And they use those water bottles that she hadn't seen before. They stop. And they take a break, and what do? They wash their hands off. Then take a swig of it. Why are they washing their hands off? They're washing the blood. Reese picks them up at North Hills. They get in the car. Ron gets in the driver's seat. Sure, it's his friend. Fine. No evidence that Ron made Travion get in the car. Ronald shows Reese the iPhone, and then Ronald shows Reese a knife with blood on it. It's as much about what he doesn't do, ladies and gentlemen. Travion has no reaction to seeing that knife. He doesn't say, what the heck? Where'd that knife come from? What's going on? Let me out of here. No reaction to seeing that knife with blood on it. And at this point, Sarah looks on Travion's shirt and sees what she called the blood splats on the bottom part of his shirt. Hadn't seen those before either. Hadn't seen the water bottles before, hadn't seen the iPhone before, hadn't seen the knife before, and surely hadn't seen blood on Travion's shirt prior to that. They go to flashbacks. And at this point, Sarah says, okay, I'm starting to be worried. I don't know what's going on here. And she asks Travion about it when they're outside. Let it go. Don't ask about it. Forget about it. What doesn't he say? He doesn't say, I don't know. Let it go. Don't ask about it. Forget about it. It's as much about what he doesn't say. And then the Super 8 motel. It's in Ron's name, and there's the completion of your timeline. This all happened sometime between 12:43 a.m. and 3:25 a.m. That's when they're in the area. That's when they're there. They go into that Super 8, and Travion has the laptops in his bag. What the hell just happened? And again, it's in as much of how you say something. And she was very clear about it. Characterized it not as a question of what happened in there, but rather a sense that we can't believe we are in this situation. How the hell did we get here? We were just breaking in cars. Now there's a dead body. You heard throughout every witness that Travion and Ronald were always joking and carrying on. They were buddies. They were brothers. At this very moment, though, the things have changed. They seem nervous. Travion's concerned about not seeing his son. Ronald seemed aggravated towards Travion. And think ahead a little bit. That's consistent with what Melvin Brown says. That Travion hit her first. That Travion got this whole thing started. And then Ronald comes along and stabs her. Sarah Redden told you that the manner in conversation seemed like they were both in that apartment. That they both knew what happened in there. And then the statement. They were happy the little girl did not wake up. They, together, both of them, they both were happy the little girl did not wake up. And if you're not in there, how do you know there's not a little, if you're not in there yourself, what other way do you know that there's a little girl in that apartment? And then she's with Ronald when he sells the computer to Julius Bumpers, who obviously did not want to be here. But he came in and he told you that the orange laptop came from Ronald Anthony. This is where Sarah would have been, hiding in the breezeway. This is where she sees Travion Smith. And thinking ahead a little bit, what do you see right there? You see that dryer vent on Travion's side. Melvin Brown. He was in the same pod as Travion from 1/15/2014 when he was arrested and brought into Wake County until some movement occurred on November 10th of 2014. And they played cards together. And before we get to talking about what Melvin Brown said, specifically about the murder, look at what else he told you. He knows about the argument between Travion and his father about the baby, about it being his kid. He knows specific details about the burglary and the homicide. Details that weren't in the news. Details that, unless you were there, there's no other way you know. Got the laptops from an apartment. Well, laptops were what got them locked up. That's true. They broke into the apartment, knew about several of Taz's girlfriends, and Taz is Ronald Anthony. Travion saying the case is going to fall because there's no knife in evidence, and you haven't heard about a knife. There is no knife in evidence. And no blood on his shoes. And there's not blood on his shoes. Unless Travion told you these things specifically, how else would you know? Lady confronted him in the apartment. He started hitting her, and co-defendant Taz jumped on her and stabbed her. Ronald being Taz. Travion punched her several times. He hit her because she was screaming. Is that not consistent with what you've seen in the other evidence in the case? That there is obviously a struggle that happened in that apartment. Is it not consistent with what Dr. Scott told you about there being blunt force traumas and sharp object traumas to her? And then there was that interesting part about last time that he was called over for a court appearance, that he was threatened by people he clearly associated with Travion Smith. Why else would he be threatened? He's threatened because he knows what happened, and he's telling what happened. And then the cross-examination of Melvin Brown. It was very, very interesting, not in terms of what happened in terms of dealing with what Melvin Brown was saying, because Mr. Brown couldn't shake Mr. Melvin Brown on that. They spent 3 minutes talking about this, about these 3 or 4 lines. They spent 3 minutes talking about that. And Mr. Jonathan Brown couldn't shake Melvin on that. So they switched courses. And then proceeded to spend 40 minutes on talking about his mental health issues and whether or not he has a plea deal. Couldn't do a thing with what Melvin said. So let's go after him for 40 minutes. And Melvin Brown gave a statement and then received substantial assistance. He got a lesser plea after providing information. But his plea wasn't contingent on testifying in this case. And then let's attack his mental health issues. Let's spend close to 40 minutes talking about that. About him having mental health issues. I don't know the exact age, but 16. Let's talk about Melvin Brown, who's close to 50 years old. Let's talk about his mental health issues when he's 16 years old. Let's talk about Melvin Brown hearing voices. He was hearing one voice in that jail cell. He doesn't know these facts, this evidence, unless the only voice he's hearing is that man's. Travion Smith. That's the voice he's hearing. Because how else would he know that? The defendant's statement. Ms. D brought up something that I was going to bring up right to start with. That I'm not asking that you take it at face value. There are inconsistencies in that statement. There are lies in that statement. And we felt it was important for you to see how he was acting, being confronted with murder. Look at his demeanor throughout the interview. He falls asleep. He says he's ready to go. When Detective Gibney confronts him about a murder charge, he doesn't blink. Reason and common sense, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't have anything to do with a murder charge and a Raleigh police detective tells you, we're looking at you for murder, what is a reasonable person's reaction to that? What are you talking about? Why am I in here for murder? That's not his reaction. He falls asleep. He lays down like he was doing earlier. And the only time he starts admitting, yeah, we were breaking into cars, is when he's confronted that Ronald Anthony's over there giving it up. Oh, if Ronald...
Overruled.
If Ronald Anthony's giving it up, I better start at least talking a little bit. I'm not going to put myself there, but if Ron's giving it up, I better start putting myself there in some capacity to save my skin. Not wearing any gloves. The whole time he said, I wasn't wearing gloves. I couldn't have been in that apartment. I wasn't wearing gloves. But yet he admits to breaking in cars earlier while wearing gloves. Here's a woman's scream. And at this point, Detective Gibney had just called her a victim. hears a woman scream. Detective Gibney says, was it a man screaming? And he says, no, it was a woman scream. And maybe a little thing, maybe a small piece of the puzzle, but if I scream and Miss Shakita screams, and as he will say later on in his interview that he's, outside somewhere, how are you going to tell what the difference is? Cuts on his hand. Kind of hard to see in this photograph, but he's got cuts on his hand. A week later, it'll look like they've done some healing. There's a knife involved. Ronald goes through a sliding glass door. If you're not up there, how do you know it's a sliding glass door? Again, you've seen apartments. Maybe all apartments have sliding glass doors, but maybe not. It's a small piece to show he was there. He knew it was a sliding glass door. Here's a door closed from the fence line, and Detective Gibney talks to him a lot about this. If all you did was heard a scream, why has it been so hard for you to sleep? You're a tough guy. You've been out breaking into cars and stuff like that. Why is a scream bothering you so much? An interesting point, again, during that interview is when he's describing the gloves that Ron has, he said they were soft-like. How do you know they're soft unless you put them on your hands? Unless you feel them? Maybe they look soft, but that was interesting. Soft-like. That you would get from a Citgo gas station. Again, details. Some of the conversation that they had. Give me. So you're telling me that the person in that apartment was dead and the police were driving around outside. Is that what you're saying? Pretty much. The whole time in my head I'm thinking like maybe she just woke up and maybe knocked her out or some shit. Kind of goes back to what Melvin Brown said, doesn't it? Describe the scream. It was horrifying. It sounded like panic and shock. Shock and adrenaline or some shit like that. Unless you're up close and personal with someone, it's hard to give that much detail in terms of a scream. You were kind of his lookout. Yeah, but, and then he trails off. He's putting himself there, ladies and gentlemen, and he's putting himself there involved. He holds back. He doesn't go all the way, but he's putting himself there. Give me, was there anything hanging on the front door of that apartment? And at that point, he's talking about how he left. He says, I know, never went up into the balcony. I'm hanging out there where Sarah says she was. And granted, Sarah said that she never saw him there. But he's putting himself there in that same area Sarah described that you saw the picture about a moment ago. And then when I heard that scream, I was trying to get out of there and I ran through the breezeway. Was there anything hanging on her front door, the victim's apartment door? Not that I know of. Huge wreath. He never went by there. He came down off that balcony, and as we'll talk about later, he went around the side of the apartment. He came through the front door because I heard it when it closed. I was on the other side of the fence. So while I'm sitting there, I heard the door slam. I look up and I see him running down the stairs quick as hell. Sarah tagging along behind him. He's saying he heard that door slam from the other side of the fence. That he goes over to the fence first. There's that fence line, ladies and gentlemen. Nobody else says they hear a door slam, but somehow he can hear a door slam from these bushes right here. Across the road, upstairs, through a breezeway to the back apartment. He can hear a door slam. Officers testified it was over 50 yards away, maybe 100 yards away. But reason and common sense, ladies and gentlemen. He can't hear that door slam from that position. Excuse me. Crime scene investigation. This was the second part this week, or what we started on Monday of last week. And again, I know it was long, I know it was tedious, I know it was a lot of things here in front of the courtroom, but it's important that you see that. It's important to show, one, what the officers were doing to try to solve this case. And it's important to see that it's not just about Sarah, and it's not just about Melvin, and it's not just about Amber. There's physical evidence too that they can't shake. Agent Tracy Gold from City County Bureau of Identification, she was in charge of processing the upstairs bedroom, said there were obvious signs of struggle in the master bedroom, blood on the Bible, purse, armoire, iPhone, and checkbooks. Sarah Redden says she sees Travion Smith on that balcony wiping down blood off the rail, off the top rail. He didn't get it off. Blood on the bottom rail. Didn't think to wipe down there. Fabric impression on each side of the deck rail. One fabric impression on that side, one fabric impression on the other side. Each side of the deck rail. What does that tell you? You got two people going up on that deck from opposite sides. Doesn't make sense that somebody would walk over there, grab that side, then grab that side. It makes more sense that two people are going up on each side of that deck rail. And then the bedpost. Fabric impression on the sliding glass door and a fabric impression on that bedpost. Miss D made a big deal about the dots on this state on the bedpost, CCBI item 46. Well, from the downstairs apartment, State's Exhibit 322, there's also fabric impressions. And in those fabric impressions, there's a checker pattern. State's Exhibit 323. Again, a fabric impression. Again, with a checker pattern. So yeah, there's dots on that one. If she wants to say that's dots on 46. Well, from the two screens outside the bottom apartment, there's no dots, there's checkers. That explains why there's no fingerprints in there too. Fabric impression, glove. Consistent with what Sarah said, that they were wearing gloves earlier. Blood on Hannah's door. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I just threw this photograph in there again to show you the extent of what they did. Agent Gold said that we didn't think there would be any fingerprints on the wall, but we tried. We did everything we could. Agent Galloway. He got up on the ladder, helping Agent Gold, and he saw those dents in the dryer vents, and he processed both of them. One on the right side of the apartment had a shoestring, left side was dented but no impression, so that's why he didn't take it. Again, let's figure out where we are. This is where Sarah says, sees Travion up there. This is the dryer vent in question. This is looking down. And you may not be able to see it from your vantage point, and at any point you want to see it in exhibit and during your deliberations, you're allowed to ask for those things. The State's Exhibit 226, excuse me. The vantage point of that dryer vent looking down. If you follow the path down that wall to the deck rail just beneath it, where the leasing office will be, you can clearly see a blood stain. Coming down, you see a blood stain on the same area directly beneath that dryer vent. It shows you the dryer vent in relation to the balcony, and there you see the shoe impression that Agent Galloway got. Did you see the other dryer vent? And you haven't seen the other dryer vent. Agent Galloway told you we didn't take it off the wall because we didn't get anything of forensic purposes off of it. But there it is. And there's the photograph, same angle as what you saw a minute ago, and I believe 226. And if you look down 236 and follow the path down that wall, you again see a blood spot on the deck rail. Interesting. Carla Foreman, she was the agent that processed the downstairs. She said when she went in, she immediately noticed that the window and sliding glass door were open, and there was blood on the window. And again, blood on each side of the deck rail. Fabric and foot impressions on each side of the deck rail. And the foot impressions all over the carpet. There's the blood on the windowsill. Blood on each side of the deck rail, kind of below now from the photograph I showed you a moment ago. States Exhibit 7, CCBI 7 on one side of the deck rail. It's not shown in this photograph, but what was CCBI 8 on the other deck rail. Footwear impression on the left side of the deck rail. And fabric impression on the right side of the deck rail along with the blood. And it's interesting, if you look through this photograph, you can see O and 8 on one side and 7 and N on the other side. Two sides, both of which have evidence on them. That is, Ms. D said that they can't explain. There's your carpet. Agent Mackenzie DeHaan from the State Crime Lab. She told you about everything that was submitted to her, and she ended up making a match to Melissa on 6 different areas. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love, it's kind of like we talked about in jury selection, talking about CSI shows. I'd love to be able to come in here and walk in here and say, yep, Travion's DNA was found all over the place. But it's always not that easy, especially when someone's wearing gloves. And again, just because it doesn't have his DNA there, the story of why Melissa's DNA is there is just as important. Melissa's DNA on the deck rail, the bedroom wall, daughter door in the purse, and the interior window and patio rail downstairs. And then you heard from the CCBI latent examiner that all the fingerprints were either to Melissa, that Michael Langley, who was the supervisor there, maintenance supervisor, and then Mr. Wimberly, who worked for AT&T, and I believe Detective Brady determined that had a legitimate purpose to be there. So their prints aren't there. There's no Ronald Anthony or Travion or Sarah Redden print there, but it also corroborates the story that they were wearing gloves. And then you heard from Tracy Davis. Limited association of class characteristics. Positive side of the identification though. She didn't exclude them. She didn't say there's not enough here. And she talked to you about the shoe on the vent. The red and black shoes, the one she made the limited association with. Shoe on the patio rail. Those are black and blue for Ronald Anthony. Shoes inside the downstairs apartment, both. One thing that Agent Davis mentioned to you is that the surface area in which they get a shoe impression off of is a huge factor in making her determination. She told you about how a vent, how it can slide and bend, as obviously did here, will affect what she's able to do, and affected why she had to make a conservative analysis. And that makes sense using her own example. If you put a stamp down on a flat piece of paper, you're going to get a different impression than if I drag that same piece of paper and try to put a stamp on it at that time. But probably the most important thing she said, well, not the most important thing, but one of the most important things she said was, I don't take into account the other evidence in the case in making my determination. I don't take into account what Detective Brady brings to me or what the other officers tell me or what a defendant may or may not have said in an interview. My analysis is just based on print, known impression. So when you take that into account, ladies and gentlemen, what are the chances of any other shoe like that black and red Nike being on that vent that night? There can be 1 million of those red and black Nikes in the world. But the defendant puts that shoe on that wall. He said it was my shoe. And he says I was there. He doesn't say it was on the wall. But what are the chances? We're not talking about the entrance or exit to the courthouse down here where a lot of people walk by. We're talking about a vent on the side of an apartment wall, 12 feet in the air, and his shoe is on. They can talk about Miss Davis's limited association and how many shoes are there out there like that in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, what are the chances of that being any other shoe in the world? The red and black shoes belong to Travion Smith. Just so there's no confusion about that, Amber Alberts puts those red and black shoes on him. Sarah Redden puts the red and black shoes on him. And if you recall, during his interview, Travion Smith himself calls the detective back in and says, hey, I told you a lie earlier when I said I was wearing a different pair of shoes. I was wearing these red and black shoes. And he was. That's him in the interview room, wearing those red and black shoes. Travion's shoe, the dryer vent, and the association that Agent Davis made. Ronald's shoes, the black and blue ones. That's a picture of the deck rail that we talked about earlier. The deck rail on the other side of the balcony. And you saw the overlays and how that shoe fit on top of that deck rail. And then in the carpet, Ronald's shoe, impression on the carpet. And again, you saw the overlay of how when you lay those down, lay that overlay on the impression, how it matches up. And then Travion's shoe, again on the carpet. This is Agent Ferrand's map or scale of the downstairs apartment. The blue dots represent the blue and black, and sure, there are more of them. But there's 3 red dots right here in the middle of that downstairs apartment. In the same area, mind you, and you saw it in some photographs during the trial, where there's electronic equipment. Both of their footprints are in that downstairs apartment. And then you have the blue dot here, the blue tack here, that represents that deck rail, where you find those shoes. And then a little bit off the map, or off the scale here, you would have this, the dryer vent. And there would be a red tack on that dryer vent, putting Travion's shoes on that wall. Dr. Scott, last witness you heard from, she told you about the 18 total blows, 12 to the head and neck, 6 to the body. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head and neck, blunt force trauma to the body, contributing factor. That there was no lethal blow, a combination of blows caused her to bleed out, would have been conscious of injuries and impending death, and injuries consistent with 2 instruments. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But that's what she looked like. Blunt force injuries, nose, the abrasion here, and sharp force injuries together caused her death. The law. Judge Ridgway is going to instruct you on the law here in a few moments. or when I finish arguing, when Mr. Brown finishes arguing. That's what we talked to you about ever since jury selection, about that you're to follow the law that Judge Ridgway instructs you on. Not what you might like the law to be or what you thought it was or is, but what in fact the law is. Direct and circumstantial evidence. Direct evidence, an eyewitness, such as Sarah. Circumstantial is a chain of events, pieces of a puzzle that we've talked about. Some pieces of a puzzle are bigger than others. A shoe print, I would tell you, is a huge piece of the puzzle. Little things, like little details that he slips up on in his statement to the officer may be smaller, but yet a piece of the puzzle nonetheless. And this is one area, again, where I want you to pay specific note of what the law is. The law makes no distinction between the two. You may have heard people say, well, it's just a circumstantial case, it's not worth anything. That's not the law. The law is that you can consider that direct evidence just like you do circumstantial evidence, and vice versa. So when I talk about pieces of a puzzle and bringing it together, the law allows me to do that. Credibility of witnesses. Basically, use the same test that you use in your everyday lives, ladies and gentlemen. If a friend or coworker or child comes up and tells you, hey, this is what happened, you have to make a determination. You yourself have to use your reason and common sense in making that determination. We're not asking you to do anything more here. You're going to hear a lot about acting in concert and that theory of the law in Judge Ridgway's and jury instructions. And basically, what that means is that if Miss Shakita and I go steal laptops from Walmart together, we may both walk in there together. She may be the one that takes the laptop off the shelf, and I may be the one that puts the laptop in my bag, and we both walk out of the door together. You know, she's the one that technically took the laptop off the shelf, but I put it in my bag. I assisted her. I aided her. Both of us had the intent to steal those laptops. So it's not necessary that the defendant personally do all the acts necessary to constitute the crime. As long as they join in a common purpose to commit a crime, in my example, a larceny of laptops, in this example, in this case, a burglary, must be actively or constructively present, not guilty of only that crime, but any other crime. Must be more than merely present, must aid or actively encourage the person committing the crime, or indicate his intent to assist. And the line that you're going to hear Judge Ridgway instruct you on is, defendant acting either by himself or acting together with another person committed a burglary or any other element to that crime. First degree murder, you're going to have two options. The felony murder rule and the murder on the basis of malice, premeditation, and deliberation. Or both. You can decide this case under either theory. You can go back there and 12 of you can decide this is felony murder and he is guilty of first degree murder. You can go back there and 12 of you can decide that he's guilty of murder based on premeditation or deliberation and he's guilty of first degree murder. Or you could decide that he's guilty under both theories. Again, it has to be unanimous and beyond a reasonable doubt. But you can pick either of these theories or both. Felony murder rule. Essentially, it is what we kind of talked about in jury selection. Somebody goes in to commit a felony and someone dies during the commission of that felony. Whether you intend that person die or not to start with is irrelevant. If you go in there to commit a burglary and someone dies during the commission of that burglary, that's felony murder rule. The defendant committed burglary. These are the three elements of felony murder. While committing the burglary, the defendant killed the victim. It is our position that Travion Smith inflicted blows on Melissa Huggins-Jones. That has been what we have been showing to you through the entire trial, that he was in that room, and we're going to talk about it some more, and he inflicted blows on Melissa. That being said, you can still decide this case based on acting in concert, even if you don't think that he ever touched her. The defendant's act was a proximate cause of the victim's death. I don't think that's much in debate here, ladies and gentlemen. A cause without which the victim's death would not have occurred. Dr. Scott's testimony is pretty clear on that. You've got to decide if there was a burglary. Broke and entered an apartment. Melvin Brown said they broke into the victim's apartment. You find fabric impressions on a door frame. And Thomas Finn says the patio door was closed but unlocked. You have to have a breaking and entering here. And I don't want you to get tripped up on, there was no signs of a forced entry here. Okay, there's no crowbar marks on the door. There's not a broken window or anything like that. For a burglary, that is not what is required. All he has to do is open a door. All he has to do is step into the apartment. There's no requirement for a crowbar, okay? There's no requirement for that door being kicked in. All he has to do under the law is open a door and walk in. And that's a breaking and entering. During the nighttime, you've heard the time frame that we're dealing with clearly between 12:43 a.m. and 3:25 a.m. It's nighttime. The apartment was occupied by Melissa and Hannah. The tenant did not consent to the breaking and entering. Pretty obvious as well. And at the time of the breaking and entering, there was an intent to commit a larceny. In other words, take things. Look at what they've been doing all night. Taking things together. Taking GPSs and things out of people's cars. Why else would they go in that apartment that night unless they were trying to take something? Ronald Anthony has her iPhone later on from that apartment. And again, the theory of acting in concert. Even if it is just Ronald Anthony that walks out of there with anything, under the acting in concert theory, Travion Smith is just as guilty. Acting in concert as to burglary. Even if you believe it was Ronald Anthony alone that killed Melissa, Travion is still guilty of first-degree murder under this theory if he participated in the burglary. If, as he says he was in his statement, that he was just a lookout or just the bag man walking around the apartment evidently with his hands on the bag, having Ronald drop things in his bag, he's still guilty of burglary. He would not have to lay a hand on Melissa to be guilty of felony murder under this theory. And that while committing the burglary, the defendant or someone with whom he was acting in concert with killed the victim. Ronald and Travion go into that apartment to steal things. During the course of stealing things, she wakes up and she's killed. That's felony murder. It doesn't matter if it was one or both of them that put their hands on her. The fact that they're in there stealing things and she dies is enough. Evidence that the defendant was an active participant in the burglary. They're breaking into cars together earlier. Both leave Sarah, and what I'm saying there is when they leave Sarah for her to be the lookout or stay there. Sarah sees Travion on the balcony wiping it down, shoe on the dryer vent. Travion has possession of the laptops immediately after. They leave the scene together. Travion sells a laptop, and then they're together again when they're arrested. All showing, again, circumstantial evidence. I'd submit to you Sarah seeing him on the balcony is direct evidence, but everything else leads you to putting that puzzle together that he was part of the burglary. And if he's part of the burglary, he's part of the felony murder. It's that simple. 3 elements. Part of the burglary, she dies, he's guilty. Evidence that defendant was active participant in the burglary, we just covered that. Murder based on malice, premeditation, and deliberation. This is the second theory. 5 elements. And we'll talk about them each individually. With malice, I'm sorry the font got a little small here. With malice, you may tend to think of malice as its first definition, hatred, ill will, or spite. You don't have to find that Travion Smith hated Melissa Huggins-Jones. There's no evidence that they even knew each other prior to this night. That's not the type of malice that the law requires. What you can use, and what I would submit to you have in this case is a condition of mind that prompts a person to take a life or inflict serious bodily harm. In other words, as Melvin said, when she woke up and she started screaming, he decided it's more important that I get out of here than her. And the fact that they had a knife or some other sharp object was used can also be evidence of malice. So he doesn't have to go in there saying, I hate this lady. But when he goes in there and he decides that I got to get out of here and we can't leave any witnesses behind, that's malice. Intent to kill, ladies and gentlemen, you've seen the nature of the attack. There's nothing else that really needs to be said about that. What you saw happen to Melissa on that bed is no doubt that whoever did that to her, these two gentlemen, intended to kill her. Premeditation and deliberation. You've heard premeditated murder, and this is kind of where the two definitions come in. Defendant formed the intent to kill over some period of time, however short, before the defendant acted. That however short is a key part of this component. They didn't have to sit around for weeks or months or days or even hours saying, we're going to go in here and kill this lady. When they get on the balcony, they don't have to say, we're going to kill this lady. When they walk through the living room, they don't have to say that we're going to kill this lady in order to qualify for premeditation. When they walk into her bedroom, they still don't have to have premeditation. But when she confronts them, they decide at that point that she has to die. And that's enough. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out plan to kill someone. It's a matter of saying, you or me. Her or me. The moment she confronts them, they make a decision, and that's all this means. A decision. A decision that she's got to die. She can identify us. She's got to die. Had to shut her up. What Melvin Brown said. She started screaming, had to shut her up. Her or me, couldn't leave a witness. Deliberation. It says it's a cool state of mind, but obviously the law understands that if you're in the process of killing someone, that you're probably going to be excited. What is clear here, and again, these premeditation and deliberation go along pretty much hand in hand. But again, a fixed purpose to kill her, not under some influence of suddenly aroused violent passion. She's in her own bed when they attack her. Again, her or me, not requirement, avoid excitement. You're going to be instructed on second-degree murder, and if these two things were missing, then that's where you would go. First of all, this isn't a second-degree murder case based on the felony murder rule. Someone's dead, a burglary happened, that's felony murder. So second-degree murder should be off the table right there with felony murder. Second degree should be off the table right there with felony murder. But these two are here as well, that you can get to premeditation and deliberation. This isn't a case of a husband or wife walking in and finding their spouse in bed with someone else and hitting them with the lamppost or the light right there beside the bed. That suddenly aroused passion, violent passion. This is a case in which they decided that she had to die so that they could live. The law, and this again comes to direct and circumstantial evidence. The law understands it's hard to get into somebody's mind, that you have to look at the circumstances. And the law allows these to be proved by circumstantial evidence, and Judge Ridgway will tell you that. Lack of provocation by the victim. She's in her bed, she's in her home. She's not out looking for a fight with these guys. Conduct of the defendant before, during, and after the killing. They're not out selling Girl Scout cookies right before this happened. They're out breaking into cars. They're already doing bad things. Signs of an obvious struggle. The broken blinds, the window, the sheets on the floor. They had time to walk away at this point. They could have duct taped her, kidnapped her, but they decided to kill her. The blood trail, the laptops, selling the laptops, getting rid of them, the conversation in the hotel. What the hell just happened? How did we get here? Demeanor at booking. All going to show kind of this cool state of mind in terms of we decided we had to do this. Use of grossly excessive force. Infliction of lethal blows after the victim fell. Brutal or vicious circumstances of killing. Manner or means in which the killing was done. That's how you decide premeditation and deliberation. "18 times that knife or that fist went to her head, neck, and torso. And then what happened? That was 1 minute. She bled out for several minutes, up to an hour. How painful, how excruciating was that 1 minute for you to just listen? And she did that for several minutes, up to an hour. And at no point did that man or Ronald Anthony say, whoa. At no point during the 18 times did they stop. Every one of those blows are premeditation and deliberation. Leaving her there in that silence for several minutes, up to an hour. That's premeditation and deliberation. Hitting her while she's on her bed after they've already got her down and keeping on. That's premeditation and deliberation. What they did afterwards. The blood trail. When I went through the apartment with Agent Gold, we walked into the apartment. As you would come in. This blood trail, I'm gonna back you out to show you what they did. And why all that CCBI stuff and all that CSI stuff is important. Because it tells you what they did afterwards. Here's the struggle. Again. She's fighting you. Sheets are on the floor. Blinds are broken. Walk away. But they didn't walk away. They put her like that, with those 18 blows. And the last thing that she saw were her two attackers. That's how she ended the night. That's the last thing that she saw. But what did they do at that point? Did they stop there? No, they kept going. They came to, at that point they go and they complete their purpose for which they came into the room. They start rummaging through her stuff after she's already down and dying. And how do we know that? Because you follow the blood trail. State's exhibit, or CCBI number 8, that armoire, had blood on the doors and blood on things inside the drawer. The Bible. They have killed a lady, and walking out of the room, they rummaged through a Bible, trying to find something in there. How do we know she's already dead or dying at this point? Because there's blood on the Bible. They don't just leave her, they keep going through her stuff. And then, oh yeah, there was a purse on the kitchen table. We've got her blood on us. We're going to go through her purse. We're going to see what we can find in her purse. And on our way out, we're going to make sure that little girl didn't wake up. And then how are we going to get out of here? We're going to climb over the same deck rail that got us up here. And then we're going to go back down to the leasing office. That's how we're going to get out of here. We're going to leave Melissa's blood here on the bottom deck rail. And we're going to leave it on both sides. Because when both of us are coming down out of that top apartment, we've both got our blood on us. Or her blood on us, excuse me. Each side of the deck rail has her blood. And are we going to run away at that point? No. We're going to stop back by the leasing office. And while we have her blood on us, we're going to go to the leasing office. And we're going to pick up our loot. What we got in there. We got this nice laptop that we've left down here. We're going to stop and pick those up. What they did afterwards can be considered for premeditation and deliberation. And again, the theory of acting in concert applies just as much to this theory of first-degree murder as it does to felony murder rule. In other words, assuming Travion didn't touch her, if he's involved with that burglary, and Ronald goes in there and he's the one that alone touches her, and again, this is not the state's position, but again, if alone he decides to murder her through premeditation and deliberation, he's just as guilty. Ronald Anthony is a murderer. That's what they've wanted you to believe this entire trial. And it's true. But they can't get away from that either. Travion Smith is a murderer also. You look at the nature of the attack. The injuries to her body. There's injuries to both sides of her body. You look at the blood in that room. You look at how small that apartment is. Both of them had to have known what was going on in there. Injuries consistent with 2 instruments. Sarah Redden puts him on the balcony. Him washing off his hands. Travion with blood on his shirt. And conversations in that Super 8 hotel room indicating that he was in that apartment. Melvin Brown. Travion jumped on the lady first and punched her several times. The shoe on the vent and the silver laptop. They're always together, ladies and gentlemen. They live together. They're described as brothers. People always see them together. They break into cars together. They go into a bottom apartment together. They go into the top apartment together. They leave the scene together. They stay at the motel together. They both try to sell laptops to Michael McCollum. They're together when they're arrested, and they're together in a gang.
Objection.
Overruled.
They're always together. Ronald Anthony isn't making him do anything. They want to say Ronald Anthony did everything? Here's Ronald Anthony's pile of evidence. The shoe impressions from the bottom. The iPhone that they want to associate with Ronald Anthony. Here's Travion Smith's file. Two overlays. One from the vent, one from the bottom apartment in the carpet. The vent and Claire's iPod associated with Travion Smith. Their words, not mine. They're right. Horrible, tragic, and completely senseless. They're exactly right. This was horrible. This was tragic. And it was completely senseless. All over some stuff. Claire's iPod. It's a very small piece of evidence in the case. I talked about it earlier that that's how, one way Travion's linked to breaking into those cars. That Amber found that iPod on Travion there in Oxford. But it represents much, much more. The owner of that iPod, Claire Reynolds. When she was on the witness stand, she broke down. What's wrong, Claire? Well, that day, all my friends were texting me and calling me. What was wrong, Claire? It could have been me. It's everyone's worst nightmare. Lying peacefully in your bed in the early morning hours. Hearing a strange noise. Not the ice machine making noise, not the wind, but a strange noise. A noise that you know should not be in your apartment. Getting up to figure out where that noise comes from, or came from. And confronting two intruders. Putting up a struggle, being knocked back into your bed, and being stabbed and punched 18 times. And then lying there, bleeding to death, while you have no idea what's going on down the hall. That was Melissa Huggins-Jones' nightmare. And it's time, ladies and gentlemen, to hold the person accountable for that nightmare, Travion Smith. And I'm asking you to find him guilty of first-degree murder based on everything that you've heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waller. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and take a lunch recess, and then when we return, we'll hear the final closing argument in the case from Mr. Brown on behalf of the defense. What I'm going to suggest is maybe an hour for lunch. Would any juror object to that? Does anybody have some reason that they need more than an hour? All right, seeing nobody indicating that, we'll resume at 1:30. I ask you to retire to the deliberation room at that time. Leave your notepads here. Please recall all the instructions. Don't talk among yourselves or with anyone else about the case. Don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation into these matters, and no conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. If you'll go ahead and follow the bailiff out, I'm going to have the bailiff escort you to the elevator shaft. So if those of you who care to go that way, if you'll go ahead and go with him at this time. right, ladies and gentlemen, is there anything that we need to take up outside the presence of the jury before we recess?
Yes, sir.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen in the gallery, I know some of you were here earlier in the trial where I gave very specific instructions to make sure you give the jurors as much space as they need. So, as jurors are passing by, or if you happen to be waiting in an elevator, I'd ask that you not discuss the case. They have very specific rules. Those rules apply to you as well, that you're not to discuss the case in their presence. The best way to avoid violating this rule is simply allow them all the space they need to get where they go, and that there's no question about whether anyone is attempting to communicate with them about the case. With that being said, I'm just going to ask everybody to remain in the courtroom just for 3 or 4 minutes to allow the bailiff to get the jurors down to the elevator so they can catch the first elevators, and then all of you are free to go as well. We will resume at 1:30.